the moment Amanda announced that my Christmas dishes would be fed to the dogs. I smiled sweetly and said to her stunned guests, "Well, since we're being honest tonight, let me share what Amanda really thinks about each one of you." 23 faces turned toward me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and horror. Amanda's flawless makeup couldn't hide the panic in her eyes, as she realized her perfectly curated social world was about to collapse. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. How did I get here? 3 days ago, I was Eleanor Patterson, devoted mother-in-law, spending every waking hour preparing what I thought would be the perfect Christmas feast. For my daughter-in-law's annual holiday party, 16 hours of cooking, hand-rolled pasta, a $300 prime rib, desserts made with ingredients I had to special order, all because Amanda had sweetly asked if I could contribute something small. I should have known better. After 3 years of watching Amanda manipulate every situation to her advantage, I should have seen it coming. But grief makes you foolish and loneliness makes you desperate. Since George died, I'd been so grateful for any small inclusion in my son David's life that I ignored every red flag Amanda ever waved. The party was already in full swing when I arrived at 7, struggling through the front door with 3 heavy casserole dishes and 2 dessert carriers. Amanda stood near the fireplace, stunning in a red silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She looked up as I set my dishes on the dining room table, her face shifting from mild annoyance to something I couldn't quite place. "Oh, good," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "George's mom brought food, too. We'll have plenty to feed the old woman's dishes to the dogs after everyone's eaten the real dinner." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a punch to the gut. Not my food, not Eleanor's cooking, the old woman's dishes. As if I were some stranger who'd wandered in off the street instead of the woman who'd helped pay for their kitchen renovation. The guests laughed awkwardly, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge her. That's when something inside me broke. Maybe it was the smug way she said it, so sure of her power over me. Maybe it was the memory of standing for hours at that stove, desperate to feel valued by someone who'd never shown me genuine respect. Or maybe it was 3 years of swallowed insults finally demanding their due. I set my purse down, straightened my shoulders, and turned to Amanda's best friend, Jessica, the real estate agent who'd spent the last hour bragging about her latest sale. "Jessica," I began calmly, "Amanda told me just last week that you're drowning in debt from that new house and that your husband's about to leave you because you're more interested in impressing strangers than taking care of your family." Jessica's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The room went silent, the only sound the faint Christmas music still playing in the background. Amanda's face cycled through red, white, and green in about 5 seconds flat. "Eleanor, stop," she whispered. "Oh, I'm just getting started," I said, turning to Michael, her tennis partner, who was staring at me in disbelief. "And Michael, Amanda says you have a drinking problem, and that your wife only stays with you because she's afraid you'll hurt yourself if she leaves. She also mentioned you smell like bourbon before noon and that everyone at the club talks about it." Michael's confident smile vanished. His wife, Sarah, grabbed his arm, confirming exactly what Amanda had said. "Mom, please," David's voice came from behind me. But I couldn't stop. Now, 3 years of being Amanda's convenient punching bag had built up like steam in a pressure cooker. I turned to Karen and Steve, the couple Amanda always invited, because they threw the best parties in the neighborhood. "Karen," I said evenly, "Amanda thinks your marriage is a joke. She told me you only stay together for appearances, and that Steve's been having an affair with his secretary for 2 years. She said everyone knows except you." Karen's perfectly composed smile cracked. "What?" she whispered. "And Steve," I continued, feeling almost dizzy with the relief of finally speaking the truth, "Amanda says you lost most of your retirement money on bad investments, and that's why Karen had to go back to work. She thinks it's hilarious that you pretend to be successful while you're both drowning financially." The party was disintegrating before my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. Couples were whispering urgently to each other, some heading for the door, others demanding explanations. Amanda stood frozen in the middle of it all, watching her perfectly curated social circle implode right before her eyes. But I wasn't done. "Robert and Linda," I said, turning toward the older couple from down the street who were inching toward the exit. "Amanda calls you to the ancient boring couple and says you only get invited out of pity. She told me last month that watching you eat makes her physically ill, and that she hopes you move to a retirement community soon." Linda's eyes filled with tears. They'd been neighbors for 8 years, always ready to help, taking in packages, watering plants, offering help with yard work. And now they knew what their kindness had earned them: contempt. "That's enough." David finally found his voice and stepped between me and his wife. "Mom, what's gotten into you?" I looked at my son, the man I'd raised to be kind, fair, and decent, and saw him preparing to defend the woman who had just publicly humiliated his mother. "What's gotten into me?" I said evenly. 3 years of watching your wife treat me like garbage while you pretend not to notice." Amanda finally spoke, though her voice came out more like a squeak than her usual smooth, confident tone. "Those were private conversations completely taken out of context, were they?" I asked sweetly, because I remember them quite clearly. Word for word, actually, by now. The remaining guests were gathering their coats with the frantic efficiency of people fleeing a natural disaster. Amanda's picture perfect Christmas party, the one she'd spent months planning, was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. David looked between his wife and his mother, his face pale and bewildered, like a man watching his life fall apart in slow motion. "Amanda, is this true? Did you really say these things about our friends?" "David, you can't seriously believe," Amanda started, but she was interrupted by Dr. Peterson. "Their family dentist, actually," he said quietly. "I've heard her say similar things at the Hendersons' barbecue last summer. I thought it was just harmless gossip, but now..." He shook his head and took his wife's hand, heading for the door, one by one. Amanda's friends either left or confirmed my revelations. The beautiful decorations she'd spent weeks perfecting now looked garish and hollow against the empty spaces left by fleeing guests. "How could you know all this?" Amanda demanded, her voice rising to a shriek. "How could you possibly remember every conversation?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Oh, honey, that's the thing about being dismissed as a useless old woman. People forget I'm even in the room. You've been saying these things right in front of me for 3 years, always assuming I was too stupid or too grateful to pay attention." Then I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could see the screen. "And I've been recording our conversations for the past 6 months. It's amazing what you learn when you start paying attention to how someone really talks about the people in their life." David's eyes widened. "You've been recording us?" "Not us, sweetheart, her. Every coffee date, every shopping trip, every phone call where she complained about your friends, your neighbors, even your coworkers. I've got dozens of hours of Amanda explaining exactly what she thinks about everyone in your social circle." Amanda lunged toward me, reaching for the phone, but I was ready. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said calmly. "This is just one copy. I have backups in several very safe places." The few guests who were still there were openly watching now, phones out, recording the meltdown for their own social media feeds. Amanda's reputation as the perfect hostess was being destroyed in real time, and everyone wanted proof. "Get out," Amanda whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house right now." "Gladly," I said, picking up my purse. "But Amanda, the next time you want to serve my food to your dogs, make sure you know exactly who you're dealing with." I walked out of that house feeling like I could fly. Behind me, I heard Amanda screaming at David, demanding he choose between his wife and his mother. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't worried about his answer. My phone started ringing before I even reached my car. Text messages poured in from numbers I barely recognized, people sending links, screenshots, clips. Apparently, several guests had already uploaded videos of Amanda's meltdown online, and the story was spreading faster than I could have imagined. The first call came from Jessica, the real estate agent whose marriage I'd exposed. But instead of anger, her voice was trembling with something else entirely. "Gratitude, Eleanor," she said, her voice breaking. "I need to thank you. You just saved my life. I had no idea people even knew about our problems," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "And I certainly didn't know my own friends were gossiping about my marriage falling apart." "Eleanor, I'm sorry if I hurt you." "No," I interrupted softly, "you don't understand." She took a deep breath. "Mark and I talked for 4 hours last night. Really talked, for the first time in months. We're going to counseling. We're going to figure this out." But if I'd kept pretending everything was fine while people like Amanda were laughing behind my back, well, she wasn't the only one, was she? Over the next 2 days, I got more calls like that one. Michael called to say he was checking himself into rehab. Karen said she was finally confronting her husband about his affair. Even Robert and Linda called to tell me they were glad to finally know where they stood with their neighbors. Not everyone was grateful, of course. On the 3rd day, David showed up at my apartment. He looked exhausted, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed. "Mom," he said quietly, "you destroyed Amanda's entire social circle. She's barely speaking to me, and the kids keep asking why Grandma made Mommy cry." I poured him a cup of coffee from the pot I'd just made. Without needing to be told, he sat at the kitchen table the same way he used to when he was a boy. Whenever something was bothering him. "David," I said gently, "I didn't destroy anything. I just revealed what was already broken." He frowned. "But why now? Why humiliate her in front of everyone like that?" I set his mug down carefully, taking a moment before answering. Because for 3 years, I've been trying to earn a place in your family by being useful. Cooking, cleaning, babysitting, lending money, doing anything to be included. And every single time, Amanda made it clear I was a burden she tolerated for your sake. David winced. He didn't argue, he knew it was true. That night, I continued. When she called my food dog food in front of a room full of people, something in me just broke. I realized I'd spent years accepting disrespect because I was terrified of losing you and the kids. But you know what? If respecting myself means losing people who never valued me anyway, maybe that's not really a loss. David sat quietly for several minutes, staring into his coffee. When he finally looked up, his eyes were rimmed with red. She did say those things, Mom. All of them. I heard some of the recordings when she was trying to prove you'd edited them. I had no idea she felt that way about our friends, about our life. He took a shaky breath. The worst part is that I let her treat you that way. I saw it happening and told myself it wasn't that bad, that you didn't mind. That it was just her personality. I reached across the table and took his hand. Sweetheart, you can't control what Amanda does. You can only control how you respond to it. He nodded slowly. She wants me to cut contact with you completely. She says what you did was an unforgivable betrayal, that she'll never feel safe around you again. The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. Amanda had always been an all-or-nothing kind of person, especially when it came to control. And what do you want to do? I asked quietly. David was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, I want my kids to know their grandmother. I want them to learn to cook from you, the way I did. I want them to understand that family doesn't get to treat people like garbage just because they think they can get away with it. Relief flooded through me. Though I tried not to show it. That's going to be hard on your marriage, I warned gently. He nodded. Maybe, but you know what I realized listening to those recordings? Amanda doesn't just talk about you that way. She talks about everyone that way, including me. When she thought I wasn't paying attention, she spent 20 minutes telling her sister how I'm getting fat and boring, and how she could have done so much better. That surprised me. I'd always thought, deep down, that Amanda truly loved David even if she treated everyone else poorly. I'm sorry, honey. I said softly. Don't be, he replied. I needed to hear it. I've been so focused on keeping the peace that I never noticed I was living with someone who doesn't actually respect me. We talked for another hour about his marriage, the kids, and what came next. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me tighter than he had since he was 12 years old. Mom, he said, voice thick with emotion, I'm proud of you. It took courage to do what you did. After he left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about that word courage. Was it really courage to finally speak up after years of being belittled? Or was I just an old woman who'd finally reached her breaking point? My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. A new message appeared from an unknown number. Mrs. Patterson. This is Linda Morrison from Channel 7 News. We'd love to do a story about your Christmas party confrontation. Several viewers had sent the videos to the station, and the reporter said they thought it represented something important about family dynamics and standing up to bullies. A news story about me. 6 months ago, that idea would have absolutely horrified me, but now it felt like an opportunity. I called the number back and agreed to an interview for the following week. If Amanda wanted to paint me as the villain in this story, she was welcome to try. But I had recordings, witnesses, and 3 years worth of documentation about her behavior. Most importantly, I had something I'd lost somewhere in the fog of grief and loneliness: my voice. The interview aired on a Thursday evening right before the new year. I'd been nervous about how they'd edit my story, but Linda Morrison, the reporter, was fair and thorough. She even tracked down several people from the Christmas party who confirmed Amanda's long history of cruel gossip. The response was overwhelming. My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Women from all over the country were calling to share their own stories. Stories about being mistreated by family, about being expected to swallow pain and accept disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. But the most surprising call came from someone I hadn't expected to ever hear from again. My late husband's attorney, Richard Wells. Eleanor, I've been trying to reach you for weeks, he said. I have some documents that George left in my care, with specific instructions about when they should be delivered. What kind of documents? I asked. Estate documents, he said, separate from his will. He was very specific that you should only receive them if certain conditions were met. Based on what I've seen in the news, I believe those conditions have been satisfied. I sat there stunned. George had left additional estate documents. That didn't make sense. We'd gone through everything after his death, or so I thought. Richard's office looked just as I remembered it from 3 years ago: dark wood, shelves full of legal books. But the papers he spread out across his desk were completely unfamiliar. George came to see me about 6 months before he died, Richard explained. He was concerned about how Amanda treated you and worried things would get worse after his death. He wanted to make sure you had options if life became unbearable. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing: trust forms, property deeds, investment accounts I'd never even heard of. George had been quietly moving assets for years, creating a separate trust that Amanda and David knew nothing about. He'd left instructions that these papers should only be given to me if I demonstrated the courage to stand up for myself against family abuse. The numbers on those pages didn't even feel real. According to the documents, George hadn't just left me the modest life insurance policy I'd been living on. He'd left me nearly $2 million in assets. Richard continued gently. He was monitoring Amanda's behavior toward you for years, Eleanor. He documented incidents, saved voicemails, even recorded conversations. He was building a case to protect you, but he passed away before he could put the plan into action. My hands were trembling as I flipped through page after page of evidence. George had known. He'd seen what I was too grief-stricken and lonely to admit: that Amanda had been systematically isolating and demeaning me. The trust documents include a very specific clause, Richard said. If David chooses to maintain a relationship with you despite Amanda's demands to cut contact, the trust remains under your control. But if he allows his wife to completely cut you out of their lives, the trust dissolves and the money goes to charity. George had been testing David, protecting both of us. He knew Amanda's true nature would eventually reveal itself, and he wanted to ensure our son had the strength to choose family over convenience. When that moment came, I thought about David's visit 3 days earlier, his decision to stand by me despite Amanda's ultimatum. George would have been proud, but then I noticed something else. A final document at the bottom of the stack. My breath caught as I read the title, Operation Truth. It was a detailed plan, written in George's hand, complete with instructions for documenting Amanda's behavior and strategies for exposing her when the time was right. My late husband had essentially written the playbook for everything I'd done at that Christmas party, right down to the importance of recording conversations as evidence. I wasn't just a grieving widow who had finally snapped. I was carrying out a plan that George had designed years ago. A plan meant to save both me and our son from a woman he'd recognized as dangerous long before I was ready to see it. Now, as I sat in Richard's office, one thought echoed in my mind: what was I going to do with this unexpected inheritance and the power it represented? Amanda thought she'd won by driving a wedge between David and me. She had no idea that her so-called victory was about to become the biggest miscalculation of her life. 2 days after meeting with Richard, I was sitting in my living room, planning how to use George's unexpected gift, when Amanda decided to declare war. The first shot came in the form of a certified letter, delivered by a very nervous-looking postal worker. "Mrs. Patterson?" he asked, checking his clipboard twice. "I need you to sign for this." The envelope was thick, printed on expensive stationery with a law firm's letterhead. Inside was a cease and desist order demanding that I stop spreading malicious lies about Amanda Patterson and threatening legal action if I continued my so-called campaign of harassment and defamation. I had to laugh. After 3 years of Amanda's psychological warfare, she was now claiming to be the victim because I'd finally fought back. The timing was almost funny, since I hadn't even spoken publicly about her since the TV interview. An hour later, my phone rang. David's voice sounded strained, exhausted. "Mom, please tell me you're not planning to escalate this situation." "What situation would that be, sweetheart?" "Amanda hired a lawyer," he said, sighing. "She's talking about suing you for damages to her reputation and emotional distress. She claims you've been systematically trying to destroy her life for months." I looked at the legal documents spread across my coffee table, George's carefully organized evidence of Amanda's behavior, and smiled. "Well," I said, "that's interesting because I've been doing some legal consulting of my own." "What does that mean?" David asked, confused. "It means your wife picked a fight with someone who's much better prepared for battle than she realizes." The next morning, I called Richard Wells and asked him to recommend a litigation attorney who specialized in harassment cases. Within hours, I was sitting across from Patricia Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built a reputation for destroying bullies in court. "Mrs. Patterson," she said after reviewing Amanda's letter and George's documentation, "your daughter-in-law has made a significant tactical error by claiming you've been harassing her. She's opened the door for us to present evidence of her actual harassment of you." We spent 3 hours going through George's files. He had been meticulous, documenting not only Amanda's treatment of me but also her behavior toward others. There were credit reports showing how she'd manipulated elderly neighbors into co-signing loans, deleted social media posts where she mocked family members, and even recordings of phone calls where she threatened to keep the grandchildren away from me. If I didn't comply with her demands, this woman is a sociopath, Patricia said flatly. And now she's given us legal grounds to expose her publicly by Thursday. Amanda had received our countersuit harassment, elder abuse, alienation of affection, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were seeking damages, a restraining order, and most importantly, court-mandated family counseling that would require Amanda to confront her behavior. Under professional supervision, David called that evening, his voice shaking with something between anger and desperation. "Mom, what are you doing? Amanda's talking about leaving, taking the kids, and moving back to her mother's in California." "David," I said gently, "I have something to tell you about your father's estate. It's going to change how you see this entire situation." The next morning, I drove to David's office with a briefcase full of documents, papers that would reshape his understanding of everything that had happened since George's death. My son looked like he'd aged 5 years in a week. His usually neat appearance was disheveled and tired. "Mom," he said, running a hand through his hair, "before you say anything, I need you to know that Amanda's threatening to take the kids and disappear if this lawsuit continues. She says she has relatives in Canada who would help her stay hidden." I set the briefcase on his desk and opened it slowly. "David," I said softly, "your father spent the last year of his life protecting us from exactly this situation. He knew Amanda would eventually show her true nature, and he prepared for it." For the next hour, I walked my son through George's documentation, the financial abuse, the manipulation tactics, the systematic isolation of family members who didn't serve Amanda's purposes. David's face grew paler with each revelation. "Dad knew all this?" he whispered. "Why didn't he say something?" "Because he knew you wouldn't have believed it until you were ready to see it yourself," I explained. "George understood that Amanda's control over you was psychological and that breaking it would require you to witness her behavior firsthand. The most damaging evidence was a series of emails between Amanda and her sister discussing how to manage me after George's death. They'd planned to gradually isolate me from the family, while extracting as much financial support as possible. There were even discussions about having me declared incompetent, so they could access my bank accounts. "She was planning to have you committed?" David asked, horrified. "Have me?" I said quietly. "Eventually, yes. Once she'd gotten everything she could from me financially and I became too much trouble to manage." David sat in stunned silence, processing the betrayal. His wife hadn't just been cruel, she'd been systematically plotting to destroy me, while pretending to care about family unity. "There's more," I said gently. "George hired a private investigator to look into Amanda's background before your marriage. He'd been concerned about some inconsistencies in her stories about her past. The investigator's report painted a disturbing picture of a woman who'd left a trail of damaged relationships across 3 states. Amanda had been married before David, a fact she'd hidden from him. She'd also been involved in an elder abuse case in Colorado, where she'd convinced an elderly man to change his will in her favor shortly before his death. "She's done this before," I said quietly. "Multiple times." George had found evidence of at least 4 elderly people she'd manipulated into giving her money or property. The Colorado case was dropped when the man's family couldn't prove manipulation, but the pattern was undeniable. "My son looked like he was going to be sick." "She's the kid's mom," he whispered. "I can't let her take them." "She won't," I said firmly, "because now we have leverage she doesn't know about and we're going to use it to make sure she never has the power to threaten this family again." Patricia had already filed an emergency motion to prevent Amanda from leaving the state with the children, citing the evidence of her manipulation and the ongoing legal proceedings. "But that was just the beginning, David," I continued. "Your father left you something else, a trust fund for the children's education and future. Amanda can't touch it, but it comes with conditions designed to protect them from exactly this kind of situation." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering that left Amanda scrambling to maintain control of a narrative that was quickly slipping away from her. Patricia had been ruthless in her filings, presenting evidence of Amanda's manipulation tactics in language so clear and precise that no judge could possibly ignore it. Amanda's response was predictably dramatic. She called a family meeting, demanding that David's siblings choose sides in what she framed as an attack on their family by a bitter old woman who couldn't accept that her son had moved on with his life. I wasn't invited to that meeting, but David called me afterward with a report that was both satisfying and sad. "Mom," he said, "she tried to get Jennifer and Michael to sign a statement saying you've always been difficult and that this lawsuit is frivolous. She wanted them to testify that you've been jealous of our marriage from the beginning." Jennifer and Michael, David's Siblings had always remained carefully neutral during my 3 years of conflict with Amanda. They had their own families to worry about and had always taken the path of least resistance when it came to family drama. And what did they say? I asked. Jennifer asked to see some of the evidence, David said. When Amanda couldn't produce anything to support her claims, and when Jennifer saw some of Dad's documentation she refused to sign, Michael did the same. But what Jennifer revealed next cast Amanda's behavior in an even darker light. She told me that Amanda approached her last year, David continued, about having you declared incompetent. She wanted Jennifer to support a claim that you were showing signs of dementia and couldn't be trusted to manage your own affairs. The manipulation had been even more extensive than we'd realized. Amanda hadn't just been planning to isolate me socially, she'd been laying the groundwork to have me declared mentally unfit so she could control my finances and medical decisions. There's something else, David said grimly. Jennifer said Amanda's been telling people for months that you've been acting erratically, forgetting conversations, repeating yourself. She's been building a case for incompetency for almost a year. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. While I'd been grieving my husband and desperately trying to hold on to my family, Amanda had been systematically destroying my reputation and credibility, setting me up for a legal attack on my independence. But Amanda had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated both George's foresight and my willingness to fight back when cornered. That evening, Patricia called with news that changed everything. Eleanor, she said, her tone calm but edged with satisfaction, Amanda's first attorney has withdrawn from the case. Apparently, when he realized the extent of the evidence against her and the pattern of behavior we've documented, he decided he didn't want to represent her. What does that mean? I asked. It means she's scrambling to find new representation, Patricia replied. And any competent attorney who reviews this case is going to advise her to settle quickly and quietly. She's in a much weaker position than she realizes. The weakness in Amanda's position became clear the very next day when David came to see me with an unexpected proposal. Amanda wants to negotiate, he said. The meeting took place in Patricia's conference room on a gray Thursday morning, heavy with the weight of 3 years of accumulated resentment. Amanda arrived with a new lawyer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I hadn't seen my daughter-in-law since the Christmas party, and the change in her appearance was startling. The confident, perfectly put-together woman I'd once known had been replaced by someone who looked desperate and cornered. Her usual immaculate styling was gone, replaced by a more subdued look, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Mrs. Patterson, her lawyer, began nervously. My client would like to find a resolution to this dispute that serves everyone's best interests. Patricia smiled coldly. I'm listening. What followed was exactly what I'd expected. Amanda was willing to apologize for her behavior and agree to family counseling in exchange for us dropping the lawsuit and agreeing never to discuss her conduct publicly again. That's not going to work, Patricia said before I could respond. Mrs. Patterson has been the victim of systematic abuse and manipulation for 3 years. A simple apology doesn't address the damage that's been done or ensure it won't happen again. Amanda spoke for the first time since entering the room. What do you want from me? I've already lost half my friends because of your little performance at Christmas. My reputation is ruined. My marriage is falling apart, and now you're trying to take my children away from me. I looked at the woman who had made my life miserable for 3 years and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. She genuinely seemed to believe she was the victim in all of this. Amanda, I said softly, I want you to understand that your behavior has consequences. I want you to acknowledge the harm you've caused and take responsibility for changing it. And I want legal protections to make sure you never have the power to abuse me or manipulate my family again. What kind of legal protections? She demanded. Patricia opened a folder and slid a document across the table. A binding agreement that specifies exactly how family interactions will proceed going forward: supervised visitation with the grandchildren initially, mandatory counseling, and financial transparency to prevent future manipulation. Amanda's lawyer reviewed the document and whispered urgently in her ear. I could see the moment she realized just how completely her position had been compromised. This is ridiculous, she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. You can't dictate how I interact with my own family. Actually, we can, Patricia replied smoothly, because the alternative is proceeding with a lawsuit which will make all of the evidence we've gathered part of the public record. Given your history of elder abuse in Colorado and the pattern of manipulation we've documented, I suspect that won't end well for you. That's when Amanda made the mistake that revealed just how desperate she'd become. She shot to her feet, her chair rolling backward into the wall. You think you're so smart, you old witch, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've destroyed better people than you. And I know things about your precious George that would make you sick if you knew the truth." The room went silent. Even her own lawyer looked horrified by her outburst. "What are you talking about?" David asked quietly. Amanda's eyes glittered with malice. "Your father wasn't the saint you all think he was. He had secret stark ones, and I've known about them since before we got married. Why do you think he was so eager to document my behavior? He was protecting himself, not you." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What secrets?" "The money, Eleanor. All that money you just inherited, it didn't come from his business success like you think. Your husband was involved in something that would have destroyed your family if it had come out." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Miss Patterson, I strongly advise you not to continue this line of shut up." Amanda snapped. "She wants the truth, fine. George Patterson was laundering money for organized crime figures. That business he was so proud of, it was a front. Every dollar you just inherited is dirty money from drugs and illegal gambling operations." The silence that followed Amanda's revelation stretched until it became unbearable. Then I began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle but grew into full-bodied laughter that made everyone in the room stare at me like I'd lost my mind. Amanda's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as I laughed harder than I had in years. "Oh, Amanda," I finally managed to say, wiping tears from my eyes. "You really have no idea how thoroughly you've been outplayed, do you?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope Patricia had given me that morning. "David, sweetheart," I said, "there's something about your father I haven't told you yet, something I learned just yesterday. That changes everything we thought we knew about this situation." I slid the envelope across to my son, who opened it with trembling hands. Inside were FBI documents, surveillance reports, and official commendations dating back 25 years. "Your father wasn't laundering money for criminals, Amanda," I said calmly. "He was working with federal agents to catch people who were." For over 2 decades, George Patterson was an undercover consultant helping the FBI track financial crimes and money laundering operations. David stared at the documents in shock. "Dad was working for the FBI?" he whispered. "He was. George had been recruited back in 1998, when his accounting firm accidentally uncovered a money laundering scheme. But instead of just reporting it, he volunteered to help catch the people involved. For the next 25 years, he quietly worked with federal agents to build cases against organized crime figures." Amanda's face went pale. "That's impossible," she murmured. "The money we inherited isn't dirty." "Amanda," I said, "it's reward money and consultant fees from helping the government recover millions in criminal assets. Every penny is not only legal, it represents your father's service to his country." Patricia smiled slightly and pulled out another document. "Which brings us to the real reason for today's meeting," she said. "You see, when Amanda made those accusations about George Patterson, she revealed knowledge of criminal activities she couldn't possibly have known about unless she was involved herself." Amanda's lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently, but Amanda just stared at me, her expression one of someone watching their world collapse. "The FBI has been investigating the Colorado money laundering case that Amanda was tied to 3 years ago," Patricia continued. "They've been building a case against a network of people who target elderly individuals for financial manipulation. Amanda's name has been on their radar for quite some time." I looked at my daughter-in-law with something close to satisfaction. "When you threatened to expose George's so-called criminal activities," I said, "you revealed that you knew details about money laundering operations that only someone directly involved would know. You basically confessed to federal crimes while trying to threaten me." "I never said I was involved in anything," Amanda snapped. "You knew specific details about laundering techniques," Patricia said calmly. "And you mentioned criminal organizations that haven't been made public. The only way you could know those things is if you've been part of similar operations yourself." Patricia opened her laptop and turned the screen toward Amanda. "We've been recording this meeting," she said, "and everything you've said is being reviewed by federal agents. The patterns of elder abuse, the financial manipulation, the systematic targeting of vulnerable people, it all matches the profile they've been developing." Amanda's lawyer stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. My client won't be saying another word without a federal defender present. But the damage was already done. In trying to destroy me with lies about George, Amanda had exposed her own involvement in the exact kind of criminal enterprise my husband had spent decades fighting against." As they rushed out of the conference room, David sat staring at the FBI documents, tears filling his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "Dad was a hero." "He was," I replied. "And his final case was protecting his family from someone he recognized as a predator long before the rest of us saw the truth." 6 months later, Amanda was convicted of elder abuse and financial fraud in 3 states. The investigation revealed a vast network of people who systematically targeted elderly individuals, manipulated their families, and stole their assets. My testimony helped prosecutors understand just how sophisticated these operations had become. David got full custody of the children, and we began rebuilding our family on a foundation of honesty. Instead of fear, the kids eventually learned the truth about their grandfather's service to his country and their grandmother's courage in exposing a criminal who had infiltrated our family. As for me, I used George's inheritance to establish a foundation that helps elderly people recognize and report financial abuse. We train families to spot manipulation tactics and provide legal support for those fighting predators like Amanda. Sometimes I think back to that Christmas party, the moment of public humiliation that turned out to be the first step in uncovering a federal crime. George would have appreciated the irony. His final undercover operation used his own wife as bait to catch a criminal who thought she was too old and too naive to fight back. But I learned something that night, something that still guides me in my new role as an advocate for elder rights. Never underestimate an angry grandmother with nothing left to lose and a lifetime of experience spotting people who mistake kindness for weakness. The truth really did set us free. And sometimes, the best revenge is refusing to stay silent when someone assumes you're too powerless to fight back. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.